Good afternoon, folks. It's the 9th of October. Another video up. What I really want to talk about is how to recover the country. The first thing is we have to realize we have a problem. And in case you're wondering what the problem is, we're illegally occupied by a foreign power. They've superimposed a jurisdiction on the American public. Through a series of frauds, they've taken over the entire country. No, you're not a free people. You've got a press that sells you on that propaganda, that BS all the time. But you certainly aren't free. You've got big tech that does the censorship. You've got the newspapers that lie to you constantly and never tell you the truth. And you got the government that certainly doesn't tell you the truth either. So what has happened is we've been taken over slowly by a intergenerational conspiracy, if you will. Only it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. And so the people that have taken us over are best known as Khazarians. This is the Khazarian mafia that's taken over the United States of America. We no longer run our nation for the benefit of our people. We run it for the benefit of their people. So we've given them keys to the kingdom, title to everything. We've given them control over the whole money system. And they put those pawns, those puppets in office to pretend that we have a choice, to pretend our vote makes a difference, to pretend that they're looking out for our best interests when nothing could be further from the truth. They don't care about you or I. All they care about is maintaining their power. And this is a giant conspiracy. This is not a small thing. This is big. So the first thing you need to understand is that we have unlawful, unconstitutional governments in charge of us. That's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, how do you recognize that you have a problem? Well, look at the war in the Ukraine. Nobody in this country is voting for it. Does it have really American interests at heart? No, those are Khazarian interests. And the Khazarians run Washington, D.C. They control all of our politicians. They've done it through honeypot traps. They've done it through outright bribery. They've done it through all kinds of ways. Whatever it took, they were willing to do, including murdering our presidents, destroying our buildings, setting up other groups for the blame, setting up patsies. The law of the land, as near I can tell, should be the original 13th Amendment. And so the first thing is you've got to realize that is where things went haywire. 10 out of the 13 states ratified that amendment. They voted for it and implemented it in 1812. But a year later, they nullified it by acting against it. They sat the attorneys in the Congress against the original 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment had nothing to do with titles of nobility. That's a bullshit, lame excuse to make it irrelevant as they possibly can make it. The main thing that the 13th Amendment did was put the attorneys in their place after they had gotten the nation into the War of 1812. By the attorneys getting us into that war, we needed to put them in their place. Since attorneys were already officers of the court, members of the judiciary, members of a branch of government, the purpose of the 13th Amendment was the separation of powers, to keep the attorneys out of the executive branch and out of the legislative branch, and to keep them confined strictly to the judiciary. But we gave it up on March 4th of 1813. We sat the attorneys in office. So right now there's a bunch of attorneys that are in office that shouldn't be in office. It includes some of those that you all revere and respect, like Ted Cruz. What's he doing in the legislative branch of office? He shouldn't be there at all. None of those guys with those technical law degrees should be there. More importantly than that, what the 13th Amendment did was it stripped all Bar Association members of any and all citizenship in these states. We were considered citizens of our states back then. There was no such thing as a citizen of the United States until the errant 14th Amendment after the Civil War. And the South was not represented at that time, therefore it's null and void. They were not represented. It was not passed by the people of the South. They didn't have any representation. The 14th and 15th Amendments are null and void. All subsequent amendments are out of order. And by the way, they never even voted on the 16th Amendment for the income tax. You didn't know that, did you? And the 17th Amendment was one of the final nails in the coffin, destroying the Republic. That's when you took away representation of the states. The state governments were no longer represented when they no longer were able to select their senators from among their state legislators, subject to instant recall should their senator not vote the way the state government wanted them to vote. So we're really pretty screwed. You want a reset? You want a revolution? You want a return to self-rule? Then you have to embrace the original 13th Amendment and put the attorneys in their places. The attorneys are going to scream they don't know. They didn't know that was the law. Well, what have they been telling us for decades? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. And I say, let the attorneys figure it out for themselves. The Bar Association is the British accreditation registry beholding to the Crown, not loyal to America. So the attorneys can figure out an American accreditation registry. They can figure this out. However, I would say that we require them to do it above board. Any secret meetings should be punishable upon the threat of execution, and execution should occur. They shouldn't be allowed to run roughshod over the people anymore. That's what they've done. So you put the attorneys in their place. You get rid of the 14th and 15th Amendments and all of the legal precedent built upon those amendments. You do away with the 16th Amendment with the IRS. They'll say, well, why, by God, how are we going to pay for things? We do it the way it was originally done. You establish the borders and you collect tariffs and duties at the borders. George Washington gave us 30% tariffs and duties. And we can take it a step further. We can say any service delivered across the internet or over the phone lines, there will be a declaration of the value of that service, and there will be a deposit made in the Treasury of the United States. We didn't have an income tax until the beginning of the last century. We didn't need one. We had streets, buildings, police, fire. We had everything before the establishment of the income tax. When you get rid of the income tax, you get rid of all this non-profit hierarchy. And it was through the non-profit, non-government organizations that the evil ones took us over to a very large extent. So by leveling the playing field, you don't level the outcome. You can't do that. That's very immoral. Nobody's God. You can't have that much control to try to play God to put equality in outcomes. No, the equality can only be in the opportunity. But you certainly can't do it the way we've done it with such a heavy-handed government. We need to cut this government down in size. That will get rid of a lot of this inflation we're experiencing. We also need to restore honest money. Gold and silver was money in the Bible, and copper coins were in the Bible too. We need to return to that. Why? Because you can't counterfeit that very easily. And you can't multiply it readily. These are simple things which we have to do. And we can do those, I believe, without firing a shot. But we have to be willing to face the truth and face the facts. Our government is out of control. This is not our government. We are no longer under the Constitution. That errant piece of Maryland that became the District of Columbia has exceeded the limits of its bounds. It was designed only to operate within that 10 square miles, not across the whole country, across the whole land. This is just a short presentation for you. Once you get rid of the income tax, that levels the playing field. You don't require people to hire minorities. If people actually own their money, if they've got, and they own their property, and I'm not talking about owning another human being, but if people own themselves, then people should be able to contract for themselves. In this case, in this country, we're forcing all kinds of things upon people which aren't right. If you own property, you should be able to decide who you want to do business with. You shouldn't be forced to engage everybody and anybody in business. You should be able to decide carefully who is going to be honorable and noble and going to uphold their end of the bargain, and who the troublemakers are, who the thieves are, who the people are that will not uphold their end of the deal. We've got a long ways to go to recover this nation. And it really means cutting back giant parts of this government. And I don't see anything wrong with that, because that gets rid of the inflation. The inflation is caused by this government and its size, its largesse. It's not caused by the banking system to a large extent. However, the banking system was set up in a way that is not fair. There's two banking systems. There's the banking system of assets and the banking system of credit, or debt rather, if you will. And so you and I can only work in the banking system of debt. We cannot turn these things into assets. Just to give you an example, when you take out a mortgage, nobody's lending you any money. They're taking your promise to pay and they're depositing it in their accounts as if it was an asset. So they get to take that debt instrument and turn it into a deposit. So tell me, if they didn't give you any money, is that not fraud? Yes, it is. And we have the, Securities and Exchange Commission. And if you ever watched it operate, you would see that those people do business under at least 2 or 3 hats, 2 or 3 different corporations. That way they keep things separate. They commit frauds. They steal from everybody else. It's a horrible system we have. Yes, Alexander Hamilton gave it to us. His real name was Levine, like Levine. He was from Haiti. He was French. He was the Rothschild's agent in our government. He established that monopolistic banking system. He was trying to talk George Washington into establishing a monarchy. So Hamilton was not exactly a good guy. You're taught to revere him, and I have to say he mostly had some wonderful ideas, but they all came from his masters in Great Britain. They all came from the Rothschilds. They're the ones that put together this money magic, the dark art of money making and money management and fraud. So welcome to the House of Frauds. You live in a very fraudulent system. They aren't telling us the truth about hardly anything. Even in science, they control the words, the definitions, and all of that, which is why the medical profession should have no credibility at this point. So I really want you to understand that they've superimposed a foreign jurisdiction upon us, and it's mostly admiralty law. Okay, they're still processing my last video. So I've got to get this one up there as a short. We're over 14 minutes. Well, take care. May God bless. May Yahweh bless America.